there isn't much of like the depth that we get with like the traditional Frankenstein story, right? Like
Yeah.
there isn't a call out as far as like for society to look at itself. There isn't there there isn't like the dualities of man as well as
Yeah.
like the consequences of playing God. It's just like no, Warwick now exists and it's everyone's problem. Like that's literally all it is.
Welcome to Casuals of Runeterra, episode 171. I'm your host, Ryan, here, the other host, Hedge.
Yes, and to me it feels like Halloween because we have another spooky one for you. Woo.
Nothing spookier than housekeeping. You can listen to us everywhere. You can visit us at podcastcore.com for all of our info. Email us at podcastcore@gmail.com. Remember, that's podcast, C-O-R. Follow us on all the platforms because that helps us with discoverability and to reach new listeners, so we appreciate it. And then leave a like and comment wherever you listen the most. But word of mouth has gotten us this far, so tell a friend to reckon with their past by listening to the Casuals of Runeterra podcast.
And I thought I made a spooky comment. Damn, I reckon with your past.
So today we're doing Deep Scars, and we're talking about Warwick. We kind of alluded to this in the previous episodes where we talked about Singed, so you have all that information. This is written by David Slagle. We've done some of his work before, since he's one of the older members of Riot. This writing team mainly focuses on just general narratives and bios in-game as well. So it's good to have another story from him here, but you can definitely tell it's aged, and it's very simple. And that's one thing we would put up top is there's a couple details that diverge from Singe's story because there's overlap there, obviously, but it also is no longer relevant because of the current canon of Arcane.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the point as far as like with the relevancy of Arcane, like if you're interested as far as talk about the Arcane stuff, like you can hang out until the end, right? Like this is the original story. We definitely want to cover it because at the time of recording, there hasn't been a rewrite for Warwick's story. But at the time of this recording, there has been the rewrite for Victor. So it makes sense that maybe this is one of the stories that'll get reworked, but it hasn't happened yet. So who knows? This might be our last chance to cover it.
It's also a unique situation since in game, Warwick had a big remodeling done years ago. That was a big event already before Arcane. So they can't really do the same thing they did with Victor, where it coincides. It's a very unique situation there. And
Right.
also, we don't know if they want to, right? That might not be a case they're trying to do for every character. Who knows? That's all been a mess lately with the speed that things are moving at. But we'll get an answer to that in a bit. But one thing I want to say up top that we'll talk about in the discussion section is that if you haven't noticed by now, right, we try to hint a lot at things. The Singed Warwick relationship is just Dr. Frankenstein and Dr. Frankenstein's monster. I think that's pretty, the inspiration is, they wear it on their sleeve. It's on the back of the box. You get the saying, right?
Yeah. And, a day will come where we will cover Dr. Mundo because I'm sure people who haven't actually looked at like these stories would be like, oh yeah, well, Mundo is Frankenstein's monster. And it's like, no. It's Warwick. It's 100% Warwick. And one day we'll cover Mundo and you'll understand that joke. But
Yeah.
that is not today. Or,
yeah,
let's face it, it's not anytime soon.
Yeah. And part of the reason I brought it up is because we have some criticisms of how that story is adapted, because it's a very understood story. What was it, Mary Shelley? Like everyone's read it, everyone understands that dynamic, and they're in the original works of Singed and Warwick. They don't put much spin on it, right? So you kind of know what you're getting. But what Arcane what Arcane did was take that and elevate it. They essentially got a chance, right, to rewrite it in a better way that fits both in the world and both fits better in their world and is more compelling as a story for both characters. So we'll get into that at the end. But all good stories told in 3 parts, and this one's a bit shorter. But part 1, we start with the citizens of Zaun being terrorized by this beast, the beast of the streets, which they known as Warwick. Um, and there, we know that Warwick was a former criminal who dreamed of escaping their past. And Warwick kind of still gets flashbacks of his time spent strapped to Singe's table, but struggles to remember really anything before that suffering. It was such an intense moment in their history. And the main thing Warwick remembers is Singed carving into him, installing pumps, installing hoses, injecting chemicals into his veins. That's pretty much the extent of his memory, with little blots of the before times.
Yeah. And it's specifically this bit at part one that kind of makes it really clear as to why we covered Singed before we covered Warwick, because Singed, the bits that we covered is with his bio as well as a short story, like it kind of gives the perspective that Warwick's trying to remember a lot better. So if you're
Yeah.
interested as far as the pieces that Warwick is remembering, we cover it in the Singe stories because bless his heart, Warwick does not remember that much too well, and for good reason, because the Singe story goes into explicit detail of how necessary pain is.
Oh yeah, and I'm happy you brought up pain because one thing that comes to mind, if you want to dig a little bit deeper into a very shallow story, is for any anime fans, which we have some of those, right? It makes sense. That are familiar with Tokyo Ghoul, a very popular property, and the main character, Ken Kaneki in that show. Spoilers. About halfway through, there's a major plot point of a torture situation in which he is changed forever for that moment. But they use that story element to really take his memories of being human before he was turned into a ghoul and his experiences as trying to become a, ethical quote unquote ghoul. And they use that torture scene to pull all the remaining humanity out of him and make it so that everything post that point, he starts to have trouble remembering who he was. That's a concept that's used in a lot of storytelling, especially when you're dealing with monsters, right? So it's that's a cool kind of parallel, if you want to look at it that way, to draw from this story. But once again, that's rooted in the whole, Frankenstein's monster, right? If someone
Right.
can take the humanity from someone else and create a monster that the world has to deal with, because after that torture scene, the world had to deal with Ken Kennedy and he becomes a legend and so on and so forth. Watch it, or actually, don't watch it. Read it. The manga
Ye-
is better.
I'll say it for the audience here. Nerd.
I deserve that. But back to the story. So we know this is where the overlap is with Singe's story, is we know the chemicals have boosted the healing properties, and that allowed Singe to be very aggressive in reshaping this man into a beast. We know the chamber on his back is integrated to his nervous system, and that's what feeds his rage and his hate and the fear he feels all the time. And although he's able to heal during all this experimentation from the physical damage, he can't heal from the mental damage. And that's what shatters his mind. And that's why I made the analogy to the whole torture sequence in Tokyo Ghoul. And even if you just want to check out that sequence, it's a very harrowing thing to watch
And
and read. But that's essentially the same concept where the guy who's torturing him knows that as a ghoul, Ken can heal, but he wants him to feel the pain because he knows what it's doing to his mind.
yeah, I just love how you're trying to treat Tokyo Ghoul like it was a lot more popular than it was. This really feels like copium. Like there's so much coping here. So
We're not
for
sponsored.
yeah, and for what I'm assuming is going to be the majority of everyone, for the people who haven't seen Tokyo Ghoul, we another great example of this, granted by different from a different cause.
Yeah.
Like we cover a bit of this in like the Ruination with Callista and her transformation into the spirit that we know and love Callista as from the game, because there had to be like the death of her humanity and there had to be the death of that honorable side of her, and all that was left was the anger. And that's what's happening here, except
Yeah.
this is also in this story, this is where we kind of point out, like we said, it's not the greatest take on Frankenstein's monster, because it's like this would be a pivotal moment for Warwick if we knew anything about Warwick, but he doesn't even remember what he's forgetting, so who cares?
Exactly. You don't the unknown unknown, right? So part one ends essentially, with the surgery. And then now the only memories he gets are these little blotches that are filled with either blood, or sounds of screaming little girls, or a specific screaming little girl. I mean, because he's forgotten his name, he's forgotten everything. The only thing he has is pain, and then this random memory that keeps popping up that he can't attach to anything. There's no thread, and that's where part one ends.
Yeah, and like I said, it would feel a lot more impactful if like there were details here, right? But it's just like, there was a girl. That's not compelling storytelling,
Like every country song.
unfortunately.
It's just
We now need Warwick, the cowboy skin.
oh boy, Warwick. Ew. So
Furries
part two.
rejoice.
So part two, he remembers the pain he felt before his body gave up, right? We know that Singed at that time, on Singe's table, he tried resisting the pump of chemicals while the toxins were kind of leaking from his eyes in like tears, and he was coughing up, acidic phlegm that would sizzle on his chest, and then he would heal back, and the struggle and the agony, and ultimately his body fell limp. And that's a core memory for him because that was like his final struggle, right? And that
Yeah,
that also is a part that differs from Singe's story, because Singed, it wasn't that he essentially died on the table. It was that he attacked Singed first and then collapsed. So those are the two distinguishing factors there, but both of them are irrelevant because not because Arcane happened, which is funny in hindsight.
no, we're not acknowledging that yet. All right, so just
Yeah.
let's strike that from the record. uh, but no, like it is like a thing to remember here as well, is that it's more of like the perspective of from Warwick here is like the struggle for survival, right? Like he is just trying to resist it. And from Singe's perspective, it because this isn't a living being, this was an experiment. So he's just
Yeah.
more pissed that like, great. Like now that the experiment's done. and, and I have to accept my failure as a lesson. But for Warwick, that was a very defining moment because this is like the moment that he remembers of the beginning of the end.
Yep. That's a great way to put it, because Singe declares him dead, and we know he disposes his body, dumps him in a Zaun sump, and then that's when that death was kind of the final step to Warwick's evolution. When you listen to our Singe episode, he mentions, like, it's not surprising that Warwick comes back when you look at his notes essentially through his story, because the chamber on his back begins to pump again and again. Those chemicals begin to flow and complete that mutation that we've seen happen on the surgery table, in Singe's lab, and that's what brings him back to life.
Yeah, it is, and it is a cool thing as far as like getting this extra perspective here, because thanks to Warwick's story, we do know that like he actually died, right? Like it's not a thing of
Hmm.
like Singe made a mistake and then like the chemicals were able to like stabilize him and get him forward. Like this is specifying that the death was a necessary part of this
Yep.
mutation.
The heart
And
stopped.
yeah. And part of like the perspective thing is that it's like Warwick gets it, but Singe doesn't know this yet, which is kind of interesting at this point.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense to delve down that line anymore because there's probably the end of the line right here. So, fun. Thanks, Arcane.
Yeah. And then part two just wraps up with his heart begins to beat again. He wakes up, and the first thing he's hungry for is blood. All the other stuff is gone now. And no one is spared. I mean, there's a long list of people he attacks. So there's a sump scrapper nearby. He attacks a priestess from the Glorious Evolution, an apprentice taking a shortcut, a merchant that was trying to avoid a gang, drum dealer, tally man, chempunks. Like everyone was getting it. And that's how part two ends. Takes us to part
Could
three.
Could you imagine like going down the alleyway because it's like, oh crap, there's gangbangers up ahead. Don't worry, I know this city, and nothing's gonna mess with me if I go down this alleyway here. Bam, werewolf. The last thing you hear is Maroon 5. That poor guy.
That's ridiculous. Nothing scarier than Adam Levine. So part three picks up with kind of just Warwick's life at this point. He has a den, which is a huge upgrade. You know, he has his own bat cave essentially. And this den, he has this feeling is in a location that felt familiar to him. But the bloodthirst is still there. And he continues every night finding victims, and it's essentially at random. And as he feeds on people, he would get these glimpses of who he was, right? And when he fed on gang members specifically, he would get flashes of himself covered in blood. And once again, hear the screams of this girl.
And this is something we'll get into more as far as like in the discussion portion, but this is very interesting that we get more details as far as like where how Warwick is making his decisions post transformation. It's interesting we're getting that now because this is kind of more like foundational like character development here. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting to see like this foundational build here, but like this story doesn't necessarily go much further from just the bio.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that in the discussion portion. It's interesting to have it this late in the bio.
Yeah, and with for Warwick, now getting these glimpses again, he didn't really need a complete picture to understand who he once was. He kind of figured it out because when he looked into the eyes of Zaun's gang bosses, murderers, thieves, he always saw himself. And when that would happen, the chamber would pump more. And remember, that chamber pumping is signifying fear and hate and all the pain and stuff inside of himself, and it only amplifies those feelings. So at this point, he knows, oh shit, I wasn't a good person. That's as much as I need to know.
Yeah. And, and it also shows as far as like the level of intelligence that he has
Yeah.
like at this point still like despite the fact that he is in control of the chemical or like he's under the control of the chemicals
Hmm.
and can't really stop what he's doing. At the very least, he can still have the wherewithal to make decisions based off of his own will. So there is still very
Yeah.
much like Warwick in there. It's just that Warwick isn't really sure of who he is, but he's confident enough to know who he was to a certain degree. Enough
Hmm.
to where it's like, I don't need to know more, but now I can make decisions with that knowledge.
Yep.
So very intelligent, considering the fact that this is supposed to be Singe's monster.
Yeah, it's like a concept of the human will, right? It's unstoppable force that can overcome anything, any adversity. And we wrap up the story in part three with Warwick deciding for himself not to kill indiscriminately. He now only hunts those who hunt others, and he kills people who were like him. The up to the day that Singe dragged him into the lab, and he still wonders if this form was what he was all along, right? If Singe just pulled the beast out of the man. But it doesn't matter because, as Hedge said, this is what he is. He's Warwick. He's a killer. He's now accepted that fact, and this is his purpose.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like that's where like the story ends. Like there isn't much of like the depth that we get with like the traditional Frankenstein story, right? Like
Yeah.
there isn't a call out as far as like for society to look at itself. There isn't there isn't like the dualities of man as well as
Yeah.
like the consequences of playing God. It's just like no, Warwick now exists and it's everyone's problem. Like that's literally all it is. um,
That's
but
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
yeah, now that we're at the discussion portion though, it is really it is really cool to get to read the story again post Arcane because of like the fact that like you can see what pieces still exist in
Hmm.
the Warwick of Arcane, right? Like it's
Yep.
and just for the benefit of the doubt because it hasn't officially been rewritten, but I would like to imagine this is going to be one of those stories that does get rewritten because the story
Hmm.
from Arcane's so much better. And this clearly gives the feeling of a story that is going to be the start of something. So it makes sense to just go ahead and trash this and make the Arcane story the start, or like that bio is the start of the Arcane story, right? Because you can
Yeah.
see the pieces, like as far as like remembering a girl. Uh, Arcane just upped the ante and made it two girls. Like he was a criminal, and it's like he wasn't necessarily a criminal. He was a sumprat,
Yeah.
that helped lead a movement of Zaunites trying to earn the right to be equal to Piltover. Uh,
Yep.
but in the eyes of Piltover, yeah, he's a gangbanger, right? Like
Yep.
it, it, the Arcane provides the depth that this was building the foundation for. So for me, it makes sense that that's going to happen. But who knows? Who knows? They might
Yeah.
just
Definitely.
decide not to rewrite anything.
Yes. It's definitely an upgrade, right? We know that because with the original Frankenstein's monster situation, the story focuses on the monster, right? The majority of your content is focused in that. And then later down the road, we got more stuff about Dr. Frankenstein himself as far as content. But for this, we had a situation where Singe's story, being Dr. Frankenstein, was more fleshed out. That was the good part of it. And then Warwick's was kind of tacked on, right? No one really cared about Frankenstein's monster. Well, now we have a situation with Arcane where both stories are very good, right? Having Vander's story built into Warwick and also having Singe's role built into Warwick, and where that can go, as we talked about, go listen to our Singed episodes, obviously, and go listen to our Arcane stuff, and you'll hear more fleshed out on why we think it's important and where it can go as we get to Welcome of Noxus coming out. Um, but
Oh yeah,
I would say props to Riot for taking the opportunity to be able to retcon something and doing it well.
very well. And unfortunately, the original bio just wasn't nearly as good. But
Yeah.
hey, it exists, and that's fun. And I'm glad that we got to cover it before like it doesn't exist, because who knows? Like maybe someone's listening to this right now and they have to jump through 18 different hoops to go read the bio that we're covering right now, which was just a literal button press for us away.
Yeah,
Like
as
Ryan might
historians, it's
just
the
go
least we
and
could do.
retcon it. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I do know that you had some interesting questions here as far as
Well,
our
there's only one
discussion.
left. Is Warwick a zombie? Does it count? Like, where do we put him? He's not a ghoul. He's not a ghast. He's like,
Like that's a
he
thing, right?
died
Like he is dead, so it's like by definition he's a zombie.
because
But
his heart pumps, but it's not pumping because of him. It's pumping because of the chamber.
I was about to say his heart doesn't pump. His chamber
Uh-huh.
is pumping the heart, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
but it's more of a thing of like I know like us as nerds as a collective community, we have generally accepted that zombies don't think well,
Yeah.
right? Like even like sentient zombies in like some of like the more like comedic side of
Mhm.
like your sci-fi and stuff like that, even those zombies, like when they're sentient, they're just really dumb, right?
Yeah.
Warwick does have like even in this bio, he has like control over his thoughts, right? Like he
Mhm.
has the ability to look within, and like in this bio, he has the ability to select targets, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not indiscriminate killing. It's only indiscriminate killing when he's backed up.
Mhm.
Uh, so,
Isn't
but
it for us all?
he's just like me, for real, for real. but, um, but like that's where it kind of becomes a thing of like, is he actually a zombie? Because he doesn't act like a zombie, but by definition he feels like a zombie.
Yeah.
I'm okay with saying were zombie,
Okay.
like it gives it a bit more of like, there's that little extra zest. Like, maybe he's scarier than a normal zombie, because Warwick definitely is scarier than a normal zombie.
Where zombie doesn't roll off the tongue, and you have to call it a zombie, because you have to. Hetch, I don't make the rules. All right,
I regret knowing you.
You let us know what he should be called, because we're gonna give you a little gift and make this a short one for the first time in forever. So as always, thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with the next episode.
Yeah, take care, everybody.